I am one of the many Pokemon ROM hack collectors found on the internet. I know of almost all of them, including the famous Pokemon Cursed Black hack that was talked about all over X. The story of Pokemon Cursed Black was and will always have a huge impact on me, as it caused me to go days without sleep. The idea of a Pokemon game that can kill others is deeply unsettling. While many try to make replicas and recreations of the hack, none can capture the horror of the original. Except for one. This is where my story really begins. Now, unfortunately, I didn't have a physical game collection at the time, as my mom had barred me from video games in my mid-teens, but the good news is that I had just gotten my own place, and that meant I could play video games again. I decided to celebrate by buying Pokemon White at the time, as it was just coming out. The release day was about a month away, so I decided that in the meantime I should play one of the old Pokemon games while I waited for the new game to come out. This was back in the early 2000s when a Game Boy or Game Boy Color game would set you back about $15 or so at a GameStop. In retrospect, maybe that would have saved me from this whole ordeal. But no. I cheaped out and went to a local flea market to buy a used copy with my friend who helped me move into my apartment. Much to my disappointment, when I browsed the stalls, nobody had any used Pokemon games, not even any bootlegs or hacks. Defeated, I told my friend we should head home. My friend must have been more attentive than I was, because he pointed to a stand that we didn't notice before. Or, I didn't notice before, rather. We approached the stand and asked the man at the booth if he had any Pokemon games. He nodded and bent down to pick up a box. After digging through the completely disorganized assortment, he pulled out several games, trying to find a Pokemon game. After a minute of digging or so, he pulled out a used copy of Pokemon Gold. I asked how much he wanted for it, and he said I could have it on the house, seeing as the save battery was dead. Filled with a potent cocktail of excitement and nostalgia, I exchanged goodbyes with the man and began walking back to the car with my friend. As we walked, I examined the cartridge. It looked pretty beat up, and the color seemed to be faded. The sticker was displaying Ho-Oh was peeling and looked to be torn in some places. That's not too unusual for a game that old. No, the odd thing was that the sides of the sticker were pristine. Not giving it much thought beyond mild curiosity, I slipped the game into my coat pocket and got into the car with my friend. After dropping my friend off at his house and driving back to my apartment, I sat down on the couch in the living area and took another look at the cartridge. Carefully, I set it down on the coffee table and went to get the tools out of my bedroom closet. After cannibalizing the battery from my digital wristwatch and unscrewing the back of the cartridge, I began the meticulous process of changing out the save battery. Once my work was done, I reassembled the cartridge and looked at my handiwork. My eyes were once again drawn to the sticker. I'll change you out later. Right now, let's have some fun. I went back to my room and put the tools away before grabbing the Game Boy Color I had ordered off of Amazon a week prior from my desk and returning to the living room. As I popped the game into my Game Boy, I braced myself for the blast of nostalgia I knew was coming. This is where things begin to get strange. The intro video was different. The sky was dark and Ho-Oh wasn't flying across the screen. Stranger still, the Pokemon logo faded in before the animation finished playing, and it lacked the copyright logo. Oh, and you know how the intro animation shows other Pokemon as the animation progresses? Yeah, you guessed it, they were also absent. Okay, looks like I got a ROM hack, I said to myself in mild excitement, as there's a sort of inherent novelty in owning a physical cartridge of a ROM hack. When I pressed start and finished the introduction, I found myself in my bedroom in New Barktown. I decided to press start and check my inventory. That's interesting, I mused. Inside the bag were 10 Pokeballs. Rolling with the discovery as an unexpected blessing, I went downstairs. In the base game, this would be where Ethan's mom gives you the Pokegear after explaining that her friend from the next house over is visiting. But in this hack, the house was empty save Ethan. Oh, you live alone too, huh? It's nice, isn't it? I think it's liberating, I said jokingly to Ethan. The Game Boy Color only continued to play its chiptune background music in response to my little quip. I decided to head to Elm's lab and get my Pokemon. This part played out like normal. I saw Silver standing outside looking in through the window, got shoved by him when I tried to talk to him, went inside and got the speech from Professor Elm about how Mr. Pokemon wanted him to see his latest discovery, and that he wanted me to choose a Pokemon and go visit his colleague. I decided to go with Totodile, but when I opened the party screen to check him out, I noticed that I had another Pokemon on my team. Now, I should note that the Pokemon Party option wasn't present before I picked up Totodile, so this extra Mon had to have been flagged as an event tied to choosing your starter. The name hit me like a blow to the stomach when I read it. I knew that name. Mentioned in online forums and whispered about in message boards. Ghost. Yes, it was the same Ghost from the Creepypasta. I nearly dropped the Game Boy when I read the name. My hands trembled with excitement, but there was something else. Apprehension. This hack must have been some fan's idea of a sequel to Pokemon Cursed Black. My first thought was intrigue. I wonder if there's something different about Ghost in this version of the game. Wanting to test my theory out, I decided to set out on my journey and prioritize training Ghost. The first thing I noticed was that Ghost's EXP growth was slow. Really slow. After each battle, I only got like 5 EXP. Eventually, though, my patience did pay off. When I came across a wild Marill, I chose Ghost to fight it. Just like in Pokemon Cursed Black, Ghost only had one move, Curse. My assumption was that since Ghost was in the game and had the same move as in Pokemon Cursed Black, the outcome would be the same. When I selected Curse, the screen cut to black and the Marill's cry was distorted and slowed down. When the visuals returned, Marill was gone, indicating that it had died. Yep, that confirms it, I said in a tone of morbid fascination. The victory music began to play and Ghost gained the usual 5 EXP and leveled up to level 2. Then a realization hit me. If Ghost can level up, it can probably evolve. I wonder... I murmured to myself. Throughout the game, I continued to prioritize training and leveling up Ghost. I used Curse on all the Pokemon I could find. Once Ghost hit level 16, the Pokemon evolution animation began to play. I looked on with excitement and a subtle dread as I read the text, "Hold on, Ghost is evolving!" The evolution animation was different though. The music and animation were slowed down. It took about a minute before the text transitioned to "Ghost has evolved into Spirit." I had suspected it was possible, but at the same time I couldn't believe it. Ghost had evolved into something else. Spirit. Spirit's appearance was a dramatic change from Ghost's sprite. Ghost at the end of the day was still just a pixelated sprite of a cartoon ghost. Spirit, on the other hand, was much more sinister looking. He had a cloak over him like the Grim Reaper, long arms with sizable claws and red eyes. Once I was back in the overworld, my first thought was to check out Spirit. Naturally, Pokemon get stronger when they evolve, at least in most cases. There is the odd Executor here and there, but it was highly unlikely that someone would go to the trouble of making a cool second evolution for Ghost and make it worse than its base form. No. The real question was how much stronger would Spirit be? Rather than check its stats, I opted to wander the overworld until I found a Pokemon to test Spirit out on. By this point, I had reached Kanto and had found a wild Bulbasaur to fight. The first thing I noticed on the battle screen was that Spirit had a new move, Devour. My curiosity got the better of me, so I selected it. Unlike a typical move that would display an attack transitioning from one Pokemon to the other, the animation that played was more detailed and came up on the screen in such a way that it was reminiscent of the Gengar vs. Nidoran cutscene that you see at the start of Pokemon Red and Blue, in how detailed it was. The animation displayed Spirit grabbing Bulbasaur, and Spirit started to eat it, although maybe it would be more accurate to say Spirit was gorging on Bulbasaur. I stared at the game in disbelief for what felt like an eternity, though in all actuality it was more like 2 minutes. I also noticed that Spirit's EXP gain was much less arduous than Ghost's. Beating the wild Bulbasaur netted Spirit enough EXP to reach level 17. I started to feel deeply uneasy and maybe a little nauseous, but I pressed on, hoping that the morbid display was just a dark joke on the creator's part. For a while I prioritized my other Pokemon that I had caught on my journey using Totodile, but the morbid curiosity gnawed at the back of my mind like a starving animal. Deep down, I needed to know if Spirit had a third evolution, so I resumed training Spirit. I cursed and devoured any Pokemon that I could find. When Spirit reached level 31, the evolution screen came up again and displayed the text, "Hold on, Spirit is evolving!" I waited through the slowed down evolution animation again, looking on at the evolution process the same way someone looks at a car wreck when they drive past. Part of me didn't want to look, but at the same time, I couldn't look away. After about 2 minutes, the text box transitioned saying, "Spirit evolved into Phantom." Phantom had red eyes like Spirit and a black body like Ghost. He had Spirit's cloak, but the hood was down. He also had razor-sharp teeth covered in blood, or at least the best approximation of fanged teeth and blood that the Game Boy Color could render with its limited graphics. But the blood wasn't just limited to his teeth. His body had blood smeared all over it, and his hands had blood dripping off of them. And his cloak had dried blood with esoteric sigils covering it. He also had spines growing out of his back. "Fucking edgy!" I said jokingly, though what humor that was present felt like a coping mechanism. A sane man... No. A smart man would have just left it there. I had evolved Ghost into his third form. That should have been enough for me. But no. I just had to keep going. I wandered in the grass some more until I found another Pokemon to battle. Now Phantom had 3 moves: Curse, Devour, and Decapitate. My opponent, a wild Pichu, didn't stand a chance. When I selected the move, the screen cut to black, and a slashing sound came through the speakers that sounded like static. This was followed by the distorted sound of Pichu's cry in an abnormally low pitch. When the battle screen came back, I almost threw up when I saw the display of mangled guts and organs strewn about in the place where Pichu's sprite had been. What can I say? I'm something of a wuss. Still, this wasn't enough to deter me from using Phantom. After the initial shock wore off, I got used to the morbid display. I continued to use Phantom all the way up until the climactic final battle with Red on Mount Silver. After cursing, devouring, and decapitating all of his Pokemon, Red's sprite appeared on the battle screen, but instead of his usual ellipses, he actually said something. He told me, "You'll be sorry." The screen cut to black and a text box showed up saying, "Many years later." The overworld showed Ethan at the top of Mount Silver as an old man, similar to what happened with Red at the end of Pokemon Cursed Black. My movement was slow, and there were tombstones all over the Johto and Kanto regions. There was also blood and entrails of Pokemon and trainers littering the landscape. When I returned to New Bark Town, I found that all the windows and doors were boarded up, all of the buildings, except for Ethan's house. I went inside and it was a horror show. The overworld had been tame compared to the inside of the house. Ethan's mom was present now, unlike in the beginning of the game, and her sprite had been cut in half. I was unable to control Ethan at this point. I wanted to leave. I wanted to get away, but his sprite slowly approached his mom, and a text box popped up saying one word: "Run." The screen suddenly cut to black. Once the visuals faded back in, a montage began showing all the trainers and Pokemon I had murdered. The montage ended with a fade to black. Strangely though, there was more to the game after this. When the visuals faded back in, I was at the ruins of Alph. The unknown radio music was playing in the background. Deeply unsettled at this point, I tried to change the radio station using the Pokegear, but when I selected the Pokegear option in the start menu, a text box popped up saying, "It's broken." I walked down the halls of the ruins and eventually ran into Red. Another text box appeared saying, "You've done it now, Seth." Now, while that is my name, for the sake of my sanity, I'm going to assume that the creator of this hack also happens to share my name and decided to make this a self-insert. Suddenly, the screen flashed and the battle intro animation began to play. Once I was on the battle screen, I saw that Ethan was now the old man sprite from Red and Blue, and Red sent out Ghost, Spirit, and Phantom. In retrospect, it is fascinating from a technical standpoint that the creator of this hack implemented a triple battle on Gen 2's engine before it had been officially introduced in Gen 5. But at the time, I didn't care. I wanted the experience to be over. I checked my inventory. Empty. I checked my Pokemon option. My team was gone. I tried running. There's no running from a trainer battle. Well, shit. Looks like my only option is to fight. Ethan could only use Struggle, and when he did no damage to the enemy team and was hit by recoil. When it was Ghost, Spirit, and Phantom's turn, the text box simply contained ellipses. Eventually, I struggled down to my last few points of health, and then I saw something that gave me a sliver of hope. My salvation. Remember those first 10 Pokeballs from earlier? Well, somehow, they were back in my inventory, and they contained the first 10 Pokemon I had cursed with Ghost. Thinking they could save me, I tried selecting a Sentret. It said he was dead, which was odd considering his HP was full. I tried the others, but no dice. It was at this point that I understood. This was a red herring. The hack's creator was fucking with me, giving me what looked like a possible win only to rip it out of my hands. I went back to the battle screen and selected Struggle. Then a text box came up. Ghost used Cursed, Spirit used Devour, Phantom used Decapitate. The screen cut to black one last time. I tried pressing every button combination, but nothing happened. I was stuck on this black screen. After turning the Game Boy Color off and on again, the only option was New Game. The game had erased my save. Over the weeks, I experimented. I tried not evolving Spirit once it reached its second evolution, or ignoring Ghost altogether, and the only change was that it would ultimately end with the same showdown at the Ruins of Alph, with either Ghost and Spirit, or just Ghost depending on how far the player evolved it over the course of the game. But ultimately, the end result was the same. A futile struggle that always ended in Ethan's death. But this got me thinking. The original Pokemon Cursed Black hack asked the question, what happens if Pokemon could die? But this hack got me thinking. This hack that I'm now dubbing Pokemon Doomed Black follows up on that question with, what happens when you evolve Death? The results would be catastrophic.